We get about 50 applications a week.
50 a week?
Yes.
How many people are on the team? Like, how do you intake that many?
I got a question from someone who wanted to know if he would go into space, when would he keep Shabbos?
What are the most challenging companies to certify?
Companies that have both kosher and non-kosher lines.
If you double wrap your food in 2 sealed bags, is it actually safe to use a non-kosher hotel microwave? How does halacha reconcile the extreme strictness of our home kitchens with the leniencies we rely on when we travel? Welcome to Keeping It Kosher, the podcast where we go behind the scenes of the kosher world. I'm your host, Rabbi Ezra Sarna. Today, we're sitting down in the OU kitchen with Rabbi Donneal Epstein. Beyond his day-to-day work overseeing new companies, Rabbi Epstein is a true expert in practical halacha. He is here to help us navigate Airbnbs, rest stops, and hotel rooms without compromising on Kashrus. Travel is a source of stress for a lot of people. I know my Rosh Kollel told me that he was once flying on an airplane and both he and his wife are nervous travelers. And there was a little bit of turbulence on the plane. So she takes out her Tehillim. And he looks at her and says, "Stop saying Tehillim, you're making me nervous." You know? So some people get nervous from the travel. I get nervous from the Erevin when I travel. But a lot of the stress is from the food. When you travel, you don't have the setup that you have at home. At home, we have separate dishes. We have separate counters. Some people have separate sinks, separate dishwashers. So are there any general rules or guidelines that people should keep in mind when they're traveling?
Yes. First thing is to plan ahead. Okay, if you're able to. Nowadays, it's a lot easier than it used to be. You can use internet, Google, AI to plan a route. Wherever you want to go. Where you can get kosher food, and even when you are, going to take an Airbnb, in the middle of the woods, you can, stock up on whatever you need. In terms of food, there's unlikely to be an issue of finding kosher food, within a 30, 40-mile radius of wherever you're going to be. Now, I once had that experience when my wife and I were first married. This goes back like 37 years or so. We had to do a seed program in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. So we were we had to go down on a Sunday from New York, but we were actually in the Catskills for Shabbos. And this is before the days, of MapQuest or Waze or Google Maps. You had the old-fashioned paper map, and you had to kind of figure it out. And I figured it would take 3.5 hours. It ended up being a lot longer than that. And of course, we were starving, and we pulled into some gas station, and we found like one or two things that had a Hechsher, and that was difficult. 10 years later, I was traveling for the OU, and had a similar experience in Canada. I was going with one of our mashgichim, and we stopped off by some gas stations, couldn't find anything kosher. We got over across the border into Maine. The amount of choices that were available, it was just amazing. There were literally dozens of things that you can have that had a reliable kosher certification.
On that, let me ask you, I get this question very often. Very often, where a person lives, they know the products that are kosher, they know the products that have Hechsher, and then they go on a road trip and they're in a different state and they find the same exact product, same packaging, there's just no Hechsher. Can a person assume that it's the same product and if it's kosher where I live, it's kosher here, and for some reason the packaging is just different?
No, never good to assume anything. You don't know if it was made in the same place. We have a policy that, in the same country, you can't have identical product that is kosher and non-kosher. But sometimes, things, there could be mistakes, could be errors. Sometimes it could be a product made in a different country and it ended up over here. It's not supposed to happen, but, with all the things that are not supposed to happen, sometimes they happen. So if you don't see the symbol on it, so you call the the Kashrus certification agency who's generally on the product, and ask them what's the story.
Got it. Okay, let's get into the common questions. Let's start with hotels. So you're on a trip with your family, and you stay over at the hotel. You get in late at night. You hopefully put your kids to bed. You wake up the next morning, and you want a nice coffee. So in most hotel rooms, they have this little coffee machine. They have these brands of coffees and teas that you've never heard of before. Can you assume that coffee's coffee and it's kosher, and I can use this coffee machine because nothing's ever been used in it besides for coffee?
Any coffee that's non-flavored is always going to be kosher.
Okay.
And the coffees that are flavored, if they do not have a reliable certification, so I would not use them because of the flavors may be non-kosher. However, using them, if someone else used them, the person who stayed in the room before, that will not answer the machine. Okay, the non-kosher flavors, it's a zevazeh goyim, and it will not make the machine not kosher, and you can still have your kosher coffee the next morning, no problem. I've heard these like one-off stories about there are people who use the machine somehow to make instant soup, and I don't know how to do that. Maybe I'm not savvy enough, but
when the need is there, you'll make wacky mac for your kids. You know
right.
What I mean?
But
yeah,
I don't. You don't have to assume. It doesn't change the halacha. There's something is assumed to be kosher. There's a halacha of Stam Keilim of a nakri enam b'nei yoman.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, utensils, equipment. Okay, even if they're owned by a non-Jew, are not assumed to be non-kosher. I mean, technically they might be. You have to kosher it, but b'diavad, if something was cooked in it, the item would be kosher because there's an assumption in halacha that the kelim have not been used for trade within 24 hours.
I see.
And this is already said by Rishonim, how they learn the Gemara and Avodah Zarah. It's codified in the halacha by Shulchan Aruch. The only one who I'm aware of who may dispute it might be the Rambam, according to Beis Yosef.
So that's a huge heter. So in other words, if I'm traveling and I mistakenly, let's say, go to Airbnb and I mistakenly use one of their pots or one of their dishes, and even if what I use is hot, you're saying lechatchila, ideally, in the first place you can't do it, but after the fact, if someone would call you with this question, you would say, yeah, it probably wasn't used within the last 24 hours, and therefore it's okay, you can eat it now.
That's exactly what I would say.
Wow, that takes a lot of stress out of the kitchen. So you're in the Airbnb, you're in your rental home, and there's plates and dishes and cups, or you're in a hotel and they have the mugs, or you're at the hotel breakfast and they have the plates and the forks. Are you allowed to use those?
So again, I would not use any real cutlery or plates. I would, obviously the plastic is all fine. The glasses that are there, if they're no paper cups and they have glasses, I would use the glasses. Even for hot, I would say that's okay because you can, if you have nothing else to use, that's a shas chak, and you can rely on the opinion, if you're an Ashkenazi, that it wouldn't, the lenient opinion regarding glass.
So this halacha, it's Stam Keilim. Is that why people are buying coffees when they're traveling, even at non-kosher restaurants and coffee shops?
Yes, that is the reason why it's a common practice, for the last 100 years, for people to go into non-certified, non-kosher places and get a black coffee. The only exception would be the more innovative modern places where they have food and these new techniques of cleaning, where everything is done together in a they wash everything. So that we recommend to stay away from the black coffee even there.
I see. So in other words, if you have a diner, a simple old-fashioned diner, and they have this coffee machine that's only used for coffee, and as you mentioned, coffees don't have any flavors or anything like that, and so the regular coffee is kosher, so there's no issue of treif. But here they have other products now, washing them all together, so that adds treifas to non-kosher ingredients or
Right.
to
That
the
would
coffee machine.
so old fashioned diner. Like you grew up seeing. It's still the same type of diner that there was on.
Same benches.
Right. In the 1960s. Those would be fine to get a black coffee.
Besides for the halachos of Kashrus, you're driving on the highway and there's a Dunkin' Donuts or there's other stores that sell non-kosher. Is there any issue of marasayin and stopping in these places for the bathroom or for a coffee or for a soda?
There's only an issue of marasayin if it's not normally done. So since it's common practice to stop in these places, for these reasons, Coke or coffee or use the restroom, there's no issue with marasayin.
So besides for coffee, I know a common question that comes up is Slurpees and fountain sodas. If a person stops by a gas station, can you just get any Slurpee or fountain soda that you want?
No, you should look underneath to see the bag in the box or see if you see the Hechsher. And if you don't, I wouldn't recommend buying it. Just get a closed bottle or can that has a symbol on it.
Okay, so now we discussed hotels. Let's talk about Airbnbs or home rentals. You take your family away for a vacation, and now in this rental, you have microwaves, you have stovetops, you have counters. Can you briefly address the issues of these different items?
Yes. So even though we said there was a heter for Stam Keilim, that's only b'diavad. That's after the fact, or you're in a tight situation. You don't take a vacation and just rely on that lechatchila. So you should, if you're going to use the microwave, is really the easiest thing to use because if you double wrap something, you don't have to kosher it.
And double wrap means in saran wrap, means in plastic bags?
Either or.
I see. But it has to be plastic. In other words, if I wrap it with paper towels, it doesn't help.
No, I would not recommend that because the problem that can come up is the anything that gets hot, the zaya liquefies and it comes up, and the paper towels won't hold it back. Whereas if it's double wrapped plastic, it should hold it in, and there shouldn't be any problem.
Stovetops, there might be dirt or grime on the stove itself, but the actual coils, can I just put my kosher pot on top of the coils and use it like that?
There are different types of ranges. If it's a gas range, with the old-fashioned fire that goes on, so you can just clean the grate and put the fire on for 20 minutes, and then it's considered kosher, and then you can cook your food. It'll be a problem if it's glass top stove. That would be a problem because you can't really kosher glass. I mean, glass is a very big enigma in halacha. Either you can't kosher it or it doesn't really get treif. So of course, not on Pesach, Ashkenazim, B'diavad and Shasat Chag, they might be medical, but never in a lechatchila setting. And what people do is you don't have to kosher it. You put something. There's a mat that's made to go over these glass top stoves. It's called a lomi mat, Lomi, and you put that on top of and it's a hefsek, so it divides between the range and the pot, and even if it wasn't cleaned properly and it doesn't make a difference. It's fine.
Wow. Is there a difference between Ashkenazim and Sephardim when it comes to glass?
Yes, because it's a question in the Rishonim. What exactly is the status of glass? Is it like a klicheres? Where klicheres can never become kosher? You can't kosher klicheres. The only thing you do is throw it out. And there's one day that holds that you can't. Not only is it not like klicheres is better because it's not boleya. meaning it doesn't absorb any time at all.
So we discussed microwaves, stovetops. What about the countertops? Do you have to do anything with them?
The countertop is a little bit of an issue because perhaps there was some hot non-kosher food there. Even if you want to say Stam Keilim, but again, lechatchila, you don't want to rely on that. So don't take your hot spoon that you just mixed something with, and that's wet, and put it down on the counter. Better to put some plastic down or on it to make a little separation between the kalim that you're using to prepare food now and the countertop.
And what about the kettles? It seems like every Airbnb has a nice kettle on top, and you make your coffee with the kettle on top. Is kettles just used for hot water? Can you just use any kettle you find in Airbnb?
Yes, no problem with using a kettle. It's even if again someone would use it for something other than water, there's a principle that you with Kashrus, roiv of tashmishim is how you don on a kli. You don't have to assume it was made with with something else, that he made his vegetable soup or chicken soup in there, and you can use it for plain hot water, no problem.
Would you say I had somebody called me, they booked tickets for themselves and their whole family. They found based on some dance deal thing, $17 tickets to Hawaii. They're like, we're going to Hawaii. And then it's the day before and they called me up and they said, I just found out that there's some Dateline question about Hawaii. Does that mean I can't go with my whole family? What would you say to such a question?
When are you leaving and when are you coming? If it's a Monday through Thursday trip, it's okay. Let's try to minimize the question.
Right.
If you had to be there over, Shabbos itself, I really wouldn't want to be in that situation. There is a question as to where the Halachic Dateline is. There was an international convention about where to put the international Dateline. We know what that is, but that doesn't have any real bearing on halacha. And there's machlokas between Chazon Ish and Rav Tukachinsky from Jerusalem. This machlokas happened in the early 1940s when the European refugees ended up in Japan on their way to China. About what day was Yom Kippur, what day was Shabbos. So the Chazon Ish opined, based on his understanding of Mishnah and the Gemara, that the Dateline was actually just west of Japan, and Shabbos should be observed in Japan on Sunday. It was a novelty to a lot of people. I mean, it was kind of a new shiloh because there wasn't really no Gaia people until then.
Right.
And Rav Tukachinsky put the Dateline much further east, and according to him, the Dateline runs right through Alaska and just on the right outside Hawaii, which would make Hawaii Shabbos on a Friday.
Wow.
So since it's a doubt as to when Shabbos would be, if you can avoid it, I recommend avoiding it. I actually was asked this question maybe 25 years ago. There are a bunch of people who wanted to book a kosher cruise, and they asked me what should they do. What it's going to go on Shabbos. So I didn't want to tell them not to. So I went to Rabbi Schachter, and he told me straight out that he would not recommend doing it for this reason.
I was speaking to Rabbi Starashevsky, who's one of the RCs here, and I think it was the only time I ever saw him not smiling. And I said, what's going on? So he said, I am going to a place in northern Denmark, I think it was. And because of the time of the year, there was no sunset, I believe. Did Poskim recommend not going to those places also because of Zmanim issues?
Yes, there's actually Rabbi Emden talks about this. The child was brought to him about going to Scandinavia in the summer months. What do you do about Shabbos? There's no sunrise, no sunset. So there are a lot of different answers given by the poskim. But to be frank, none of them really make you too comfortable. And the Rabbi Emden actually suggests to avoid going to these places because of this reason.
Wow. Okay, I want to pivot and just talk about you for a few minutes. You're a Musmach of Chaim Berlin.
Yes.
And so how did you get from Chaim Berlin to here?
That's an interesting question.
I mean, you've been here for over 30 years, right?
Yes. Yeah. I had a neighbor who worked in the OU at the time, and my wife was pregnant with our first kids. We had twins, and
Belated Mazel Tov.
I was looking for something, and my neighbor told me that there's an opening in the OU, so send in a resume. So I did, and that was that.
Were you always a Baal Halacha? Did you always like Halacha?
Yes, my father was a Rav. He was in Bridgeport, Connecticut for over 40 years. He was a Muslim of Rav Moshe. And he was always into, he was into the Yeshiva Shalomdas, but he wanted to, me to have a focus on, practical halacha. Felt that was very important. It shouldn't be a from a maskil.
And was the Olam in Chaim Berlin into halacha at the time, or were you more of like you had to be a side project?
It was a side project. Yeah. It was, now they have a halacha kollel, but in those days there wasn't such a thing.
Oh. And when you came into the OU, what was your job? What kind of accounts did they give you?
Before we brought in Chaim Goldberg and I handed it off to him, I was the fish man. On the can of Starkist, after Charlie, it was me, and then it became Rabbi Goldberg.
Did you find fish fascinating? Was that, did you like it, or you were?
I did like it. I felt, I did a lot of research when I was doing fish and fish lists, and I found it to be fascinating. And in the first few months I was here, I went to Ecuador, spent a few lovely days there. That's an experience in of itself. I was in Puerto Rico, and it was, I saw a lot of fish places. Although Ecuador is still functioning, and Puerto Rico, I don't think they make tuna fish there anymore. So
both of those were tuna fish plants.
Yeah.
Wow. Is that where most of the tuna fish comes from?
Now most of it comes from Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines.
Wow. So you were involved in fish, and then you switched to...
Then I became involved with the new company department, setting up new companies, and I somehow was given the responsibility of Far Eastern Kashrus.
Really?
Yes.
It's funny, in all of my interactions with non-Jews that involve kosher food, there seems to be an assumption out there that kosher food means food that was blessed by a rabbi. Do you get that when companies come to you and say, "We'd like OU certification, can you come and bless the food?"
Sometimes that is the assumption, and we have to try to explain to the people that's not what happens. I remember hearing a story from one of the kosher winemakers. He first came to the country as a young refugee. He went to see kosher wine production, and it was basically a non-kosher company, and there was a rabbi who came. He went and used the basic Yisei, came in and made a chazanish asher yatzar, and he pronounced it kosher. So, I'm sure that didn't help it either.
You are working to do away with that misconception.
Right.
And so, and the companies that come, you're on the intake for the OU. How many companies are we talking about? How many new companies, let's say, in a week come to the OU?
We get about 50 applications a week.
50 a week?
Yes.
Wow. How many people are on the team? Like, how do you intake that many?
We have about 8 or 10 rabbis in the new company department.
Wow.
And we're busy.
And are the companies generally surprised at what's needed for kosher certification?
Not generally. Some of them are, but over time, I think most people have gotten the memo. That's not about the blessing, and it's about the ingredients
Right.
and you know again, we're talking now to a more savvy group of people, and they do internet research, and they know a little bit about what they're getting into.
And what's driving most companies now to get a certification? Is it that they're trying to appeal to the kosher market?
The bigger market that you can market to, you're more likely to make money. We do know from supermarket chains that if you have a Hechsher, you're going to be given shelf space, quicker than if you don't have a Hechsher.
Are you looking at their products lists, and are you looking at their ingredients? Like, can you do it in your sleep now?
Yeah, you have
in your
to
head you have
look
a
over.
database of 10,000.
You have to look over all the ingredients and all the products, and even before the get-go, we review it and say, before we continue, you want to go down this road, this needs to be changed, that needs to be changed, and most often they're willing to make the changes, and if they can't, then we can't.
Wow. And are there, the same way that technology is advancing and everything is advancing, are the kinds of ingredients changing all the time? Do you constantly have to do research on new ingredients you've never seen before?
I wouldn't say constantly, but we occasionally. I would reframe that and say sometimes even old ingredients that have been around for a long time have to be rejudged, and to see how they're made, and because not just are new things being made, there are new ways to make old things.
Fascinating. And for these companies that you're bringing in, do you have to go visit them on site?
Sure.
Yeah. So what are some exotic places that you've been to, or some strange places you've been to?
Baruch Hashem, nowadays, I don't really have to go myself. I can send other people.
The young guys to
Right.
places you don't want to go to.
Exactly. There are people who like to get the miles, I myself have been to China 3 times. I've been to British Columbia a few times. I've been to the Maritimes in Canada. I actually did not know until I was there that there is a time zone in North America that is 1 hour ahead of New York, and that is the Maritimes.
Wow.
And
so, pardon my ignorance. I mean, how does the OU? You said you're in charge of the Far Eastern Kashrus.
Yeah.
How does the OU communicate with the people on the ground? I mean, I don't speak Chinese. You don't speak Chinese.
So we have some people in China who work for us who are actually Chinese.
They're Chinese
Yes.
Orthodox Jews, or we hire
One is
locals?
actually a Chinese Orthodox Jew, and we have some who are not Jewish who help us with translation and scheduling. And we have a couple of mashgichim who actually who live in Israel. One lives in Israel, one lives in Australia, who actually read and speak Mandarin.
Wow.
And by the way, English is pretty much the international language. So most people, there are some countries where it's very hard to find an English speaker. Let's say Korea is very hard. I don't know why. I mean, whereas in China, it's pretty easy to find people speaking English.
Hotels have changed over. Nobody uses keys anymore. Almost nobody uses keys anymore. Now, in order to get into your room, you have to use the electronic cards. So, are you allowed to go to a hotel knowing that in order to get into your room, you're going to have to use the electronic cards? Are you allowed to carry them? Are you allowed to ask the doorman to open up your door for you? What do people do?
I would not recommend making a plan relying on that to go on Shabbos. However, if you in one of those situations where you're stuck, your flight was canceled, and you're in a place for Shabbos, and so that is a real shasat chak, you can rely on Amir La'akum, b'makom, shvus to shvus. Over here, it will be one drabanan is Amir La'akum, the second drabanan is using the electronic key. So if you're stuck, you're stuck.
But so you can ask the doorman or someone at the front desk to open
right,
for you.
But I would not recommend that planning a vacation to go somewhere like that.
And what about in a lot of hotels? They have automatic lights that go on in hallways or in lobbies. If you check into a hotel and it's Shabbos, and then you realize that in order to leave the hotel, leave your room, there are lights going to turn on, or there's video cameras that are videoing you? What do you do in such a situation?
So Rabbi Wozner deals with this question in the Shevet HaLevi, and he's matter. It's a psikresha de lo nichalei.
You don't really want it.
You don't want these things. It's b'makom tsar. If you would want it, then it will be a problem. But if you're not interested in it, you're passing by a hall that you can get by and it's lit, and the light, there'll be an additional light or something, which is usually the case. So I would not worry about it.
What are some of the craziest questions or more stressful questions that you've gotten?
I got a question from someone who wanted to know if he would go into space, outer space, when would he keep Shabbos?
So you're getting 50 applications of new companies every week. What are the most challenging companies to certify?
Companies that have both kosher and non-kosher lines are the hardest to certify, because you want to do it right, and you want to give service, and you need to do a lot of explaining, how they can have kosher and non-kosher, or how they can't have non-kosher. Those are the most challenging. I mean, we won't end up doing them, or we'll have to do special kosher productions with like a special campaign. But those are the most challenging.
Thank you very, very much for coming. This has been fascinating, and I'm sure we can have you back for a few more.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
That was an incredibly illuminating conversation. A huge thank you to Rabbi Epstein for taking the time to join us today and giving us some serious peace of mind for our next trip. And thank you for tuning in to Keeping It Kosher. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe. We'll see you next month as we continue to uncover the stories behind the symbol.